The sun spilled golden light over the rolling vineyards of the Langston estate, casting long shadows over the white linen canopies and crystal-draped oaks that arched across the manicured lawns. It was the kind of wedding that felt more like a coronation. Champagne flutes glistened in every hand, laughter echoed over string quartet melodies, and murmurs of business mergers, foreign properties, and private jets danced across the tables like perfume. But the center of it all were Isabel Langston and her soon-to-be husband, Julian Mercer, a match whispered about in upper echelons for months. Isabel, the daughter of banking royalty, was bred for this world of privilege and polish. Julian, a tech entrepreneur whose company had skyrocketed in valuation over the past year, brought not just charm but legacy potential to the union. He was admired, envied, and, most importantly, welcomed. That is, until his grandmother arrived. Clara Mercer stepped out of a sleek town car with Julian's help, her silver curls tucked beneath a simple but elegant navy hat. Her dress was tasteful, her pearls understated, her shoes low and practical. Though modest in appearance, there was a quiet strength to her posture, an unshakable grace in the way she folded her hands and took in the grandeur around her. But as she walked among the guests, it became painfully clear she didn't belong, at least, not to them. The Langston family barely acknowledged her. Margaret Langston, Isabel's mother, stood near the grand floral archway, a wine glass clutched loosely in her manicured hand, her expression taut. She leaned toward her sister with a smirk. "I suppose no one told her this isn't a church potluck," she said, loud enough for surrounding guests to hear. Polite, stifled laughter followed. Clara heard it. Of course she did. But she didn't flinch. At 81, she had heard worse, survived worse. Isabel's father, Gregory Langston, gave her a cursory nod, the kind reserved for staff or elevator attendants. There was no welcome, no handshake, just mild annoyance and vague discomfort. To him, Clara was a name on a guest list, a relic of Julian's past that had somehow wandered into their world. That Julian's jaw tensed. He'd hoped for civility, if not warmth. But Clara simply patted his arm gently. "Don't trouble yourself, darling. Some people aren't taught how to see clearly." The microaggressions piled up quickly. When she took a seat near the fountain, several guests subtly relocated. When she tried to make conversation, responses came clipped, barely veiled in politeness. At one point, when she reached for an hors d'oeuvre, Margaret wrinkled her nose as though the canapes had been soiled. The arrogance was palpable. And Clara? Unbothered. She smiled. She observed. She watched. And waited. The Langstons floated through their crowd like royalty, basking in their curated perfection. The CEO of a luxury real estate firm, the senator from Connecticut, a famed opera singer. They were all treated to exuberant charm and lavish praise. Meanwhile, Clara sat quietly at her table, a ghost to everyone but her grandson. But someone else noticed. At a table tucked beneath a cherry blossom canopy sat a man who observed with the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable. His suit was crisp, yet unflashy. His demeanor unassuming, yet unmistakably commanding. Guests passed him without recognizing who he was, a fact he seemed to relish. He saw the look shot at Clara, the way Margaret whispered behind her hand, the subtle discomfort when Clara approached the gift table or lingered too long near the stage. That he watched, and he waited. When the sun dipped behind the hills and the reception hit its peak, the event planner tapped the microphone on the central platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called, her voice polished. "Before dinner is served, we have a very special moment planned." Heads turned. Glasses clinked. "We're honored to welcome someone whose impact on philanthropy, innovation, and leadership has inspired generations. Please join me in recognizing our guest of honor tonight." The room collectively straightened. The Langstons, in particular, perked up. Margaret sat up taller, her smile already preening. The well-dressed man stood and walked straight toward Clara Mercer. A gasp rippled through the air. He didn't head to the stage. He stopped before the elderly woman seated alone and bowed deeply. "Madam Mercer," he said with genuine reverence. It's an honor. Clara smiled faintly. William, you always did know how to make an entrance. Julian blinked. Isabel's mouth opened slightly. William Asher. The William Asher. Billionaire philanthropist. Tech investor. The man behind Asher Global. A legend not only in business but in human rights, education, and international diplomacy. And he had just bowed to Clara Mercer. Murmurs exploded like fireworks. Someone dropped a wine glass. William turned to the crowd. I'm often asked who my greatest mentor was, who taught me that leadership wasn't about dominance, but about responsibility, who showed me how to build not just success, but significance. He looked at Clara. This woman, he said. Clara Mercer taught me that. When I was a frightened, broken turn, she gave me my first real job. When I nearly lost everything, she reminded me who I was. He placed a hand over his heart. Everything I am is because of her. Silence. Then William motioned toward her. She's been honored by 5 presidents. She sat on the board of global charities. She funded education for over 3,000 students, most of them women of color. And yet tonight, I watch people pretend she didn't exist. Margaret looked pale. Gregory's lips tightened. William's gaze swept across the stunned crowd. Shame on anyone who couldn't see the greatness sitting right in front of them. Clara didn't gloat. She didn't scold. She simply tilted her head, her expression as steady as it had been all night. Margaret stammered. I had no idea. Clara turned to her, voice like velvet. No, dear. You didn't bother to ask. Gregory attempted to recover, extending a hand. Madam Mercer, perhaps we can, but she'd already turned away. Julian's chest swelled with pride. I think we're done here, he said quietly to Isabel, who now looked as though the world had tilted beneath her. Her eyes flicked from Clara to her parents, realization blooming in shades of embarrassment and clarity. I'm sorry, she whispered. I let them talk about her like she didn't matter. I stood there. I didn't speak. Clara, who had approached to say goodbye, looked at her with gentleness. Growth begins with acknowledgement. I want to change, Isabel said, her voice shaking. Not just for him. For me. Clara touched her arm. Then do. As the night wore on, guests who had ignored Clara now lined up to shake her hand. Margaret remained rooted to her seat, her wine untouched. Gregory muttered something about a donation. Neither could meet Clara's eyes by the end of the night. The center of the reception wasn't the bride or groom, or even the billionaire guest of honor. It was the woman they had dismissed, Clara Mercer, not because she demanded it, but because her presence left no choice. When she finally departed, Julian offered his arm again. They walked slowly back toward the car, past tables of murmuring guests, past chandeliers that now seemed dimmer. Did it hurt? He asked softly. Everything they said, the way they acted. Clara's smile was slow. Of course it did. But sometimes pain has a purpose. And what's the purpose tonight? She looked up at the stars, to remind people that worth isn't worn. It's lived. And eventually it shows. They drove away quietly, the night behind them. But the lesson lingered, not just for the Langstons, for everyone. Because sometimes, the person you treat as an afterthought turns out to be the one writing the legacy you'll one day hope to be part of.